In the far reaches of the universe, on a planet called Veltria, there was a species known as the Veltrians. A tall, silver-skinned race with elongated limbs and intricate, bioluminescent patterns that pulsed across their bodies. They were an advanced civilization, masters of energy manipulation and quantum technology. Their planet, once a paradise, had become a bleak wasteland. For centuries, the Veltrians thrived under the protection of a powerful energy source known as the Eon crystals. These crystals had sustained their world's ecosystems, powered their technology, and ensured their survival. But no one could have predicted the disaster that would soon unfold. It began as a small, seemingly insignificant ripple in the crystal's energy field, but within months, it spread like a virus. The Eon crystals began to decay, their power dwindling rapidly. The planet's atmosphere began to shift, the oceans turned toxic, and the once fertile soil turned to dust. The Veltrians tried everything. They attempted to repair the crystals, re-energize their fields, even tapping into forbidden energies to reverse the damage, but all their efforts were in vain. The planet's end was inevitable. In their final days, the Veltrians faced an agonizing choice: die with their world or search the stars for a new home. Among the leaders of the Veltrian Council was Tarius, a brilliant and ambitious scientist. He had always believed that the Veltrians' destiny lay beyond their homeworld, that the universe held other worlds for them to discover. As their civilization crumbled, Tarius spearheaded the effort to find refuge. Along with a small team of his most trusted colleagues, he designed a ship capable of traveling through the unstable rifts in space that now ravaged their galaxy. It would be their last hope. After weeks of preparation, the ship, named Exodus, was ready. With heavy hearts and a sense of foreboding, the Veltrians boarded the vessel, leaving their once beautiful planet behind. The journey through the rift was turbulent, the ship straining against the gravitational forces and temporal distortions that tore at the very fabric of reality. But through it all, Tarius remained focused. His people had no other choice but to survive. After what felt like an eternity, the rift finally spat them out into the unknown, a vast, unknown corner of the universe. They emerged into a serene galaxy, filled with stars and planets. At the helm of the Exodus, Tarius was the first to spot it, a small blue-green world, distant yet familiar. "Earth, that's our new home," Tarius whispered, his voice full of awe and terror. "We must make it ours. We must survive." The Veltrians descended toward Earth, their hearts heavy with the burden of their people's survival. But they would soon discover that their presence would not go unnoticed, and their very existence would set into motion a series of events that would alter the course of Earth's future forever. As the Exodus touched down in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, the Veltrians disembarked, their silver forms blending with the shadowed trees. With a collective breath, they looked out at the world that would become their new home. What they did not realize was that the very arrival of their ship was already beginning to affect the planet in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. Subtle at first, the changes would grow rapidly, affecting not just the ecosystem, but the very fabric of Earth's biology. The seeds of something terrible had been planted, and it was only just beginning. As the days passed since their arrival on Earth, the Veltrians set up a modest settlement deep in the forest. Tarius, ever the visionary, was eager to study the planet and its resources. His team worked tirelessly to adapt their technology to Earth's environment, eager to find ways to sustain their people. At first, Earth seemed like an unspoiled paradise, untouched by the technological scars of other civilizations. The planet was abundant with life, its ecosystems teeming with diversity. But as the Veltrians began their studies, strange occurrences began to happen. At first, they chalked it up to the stress of their journey. After all, they were survivors of a dying world. But the changes soon became impossible to ignore. The first sign was subtle, a shift in the local wildlife. Small animals, such as deer and rabbits, began to behave erratically. They would gather in large groups, their eyes vacant and distant, almost as if they were being controlled by some unseen force. But when the Veltrians tried to investigate further, the animals scattered, vanishing into the shadows as if afraid. Then came the trees. The lush, green forest around them started to wither. At first, it was just a few dead branches here and there. But within days, entire sections of the forest seemed to be rotting from the inside out. The leaves turned black, curling into sharp, brittle shapes before falling to the ground like ash. The soil became increasingly dry and cracked, as though life itself was being drained from the land. Tarius, though a brilliant scientist, couldn't explain it. It must be a reaction to our presence, he muttered to his closest allies as they gathered in the dimly lit war room within their ship. The energy from the rift, it must be affecting the planet's ecosystem in ways we don't fully understand. Maybe we've disrupted a delicate balance. But there was no time to dwell on the cause. The Veltrians were desperate for survival, and they couldn't afford to abandon Earth. Not now, not when they had come so far. Meanwhile, strange reports began to surface from the local human population. Those living near the crash site of the Exodus had begun to notice oddities. Crops failing, the air growing heavier, animals acting in strange, aggressive ways. But no one knew the truth. No one knew the Veltrians were the source of the growing disturbances. The humans, unaware of the alien presence, simply assumed it was a natural anomaly, a strange happening in an already mysterious world. It wasn't long before the planet began to fight back. In the days that followed, the environment grew increasingly unstable. Weather patterns became erratic. Torrential rains poured down, followed by scorching heat waves. Earthquakes shook the ground, even in areas previously thought to be tectonically stable. Volcanoes that had long been dormant suddenly erupted, spewing ash and lava into the sky. It wasn't just the weather that was changing. As the Veltrians studied the energy fields around them, they realized that the very molecules of the air seemed to be shifting. The atmosphere had become denser, more oppressive. Even their own bioluminescent markings began to flicker unnaturally, as if something was interfering with the energy they absorbed from the planet. Tarius began to worry. He'd expected some adaptation period, some challenges, yes, but not this. The very planet seemed to be reacting to their presence, and not in a welcoming way. He gathered his team for a meeting to discuss the growing crisis. "We cannot ignore the signs anymore," Tarius said, his voice grim. "There is something wrong with this world. It is reacting to us, as though it is rejecting us." One of his colleagues, Zira, a scientist who specialized in planetary biology, spoke up. "Could it be the rift? Perhaps the energy we used to cross dimensions has altered the planet's natural frequencies." Tarius shook his head. "No, it's not just the rift. It's something more. It's as though Earth itself is aware of us. It's changing, adapting in response to our presence." Zira's eyes widened. "Do you mean the planet is alive?" Tarius paused, unsure. "I don't know, but if it is, then we may have made a grave mistake by coming here." The Veltrians' desperation grew as their once hopes for a peaceful refuge on Earth began to unravel. They knew they had to find answers, but what could they do when the very land they had chosen to call home seemed to be turning against them? And far beyond their settlement, in cities and towns across the globe, strange phenomena were starting to spread. People began reporting bizarre dreams, visions of dark skies, burning landscapes, and strange figures with silver skin. Whispers spread among the human population, rumors of alien sightings. The world, already on edge, began to question if Earth was truly as safe as they had once believed. The Veltrians were not alone in this struggle. The planet's ecosystem was shifting, and it would only be a matter of time before the full consequences of their arrival would become clear. As the days turned into weeks, the changes on Earth grew more drastic, more undeniable. The once vibrant forest surrounding the Veltrian settlement continued to wither. Rivers, once teeming with life, began to dry up, their waters turning a strange, oily hue. And in the distance, the air shimmered with an unsettling distortion, as if the very atmosphere was becoming unstable. Tarius stood in the observation deck of their ship, gazing out at the sprawling wilderness that now felt foreign and hostile. He had spent countless hours in the laboratory, analyzing the planet's energy fields, trying to understand why Earth's ecosystem was collapsing. But every test, every scan, only deepened his confusion. There was no clear explanation. Perhaps we were wrong to think we could coexist with this planet. Zira's voice broke through his thoughts. Tarius turned to face her. What do you mean? Zira's face was tense, her brows furrowed in deep concern. It's not just the land that's changing. I've been studying the local flora and fauna. The energy signatures are unnatural. They're being affected by something beyond our arrival. Something more powerful, more ancient than we are. Tarius paced the room, his mind racing. So you believe Earth is fighting back against us? Zira hesitated before answering. I think it's something worse. I think Earth is trying to warn us. We are not the first to arrive here. There may have been others before us. Other species who tried to make this planet their own. And whatever happened to them, it may be happening to us now. Tarius paused. Are you suggesting that Earth is rejecting us like it did the others? Zira nodded. Yes, and if we don't understand what's causing this, we could be doomed. But as Tarius and Zira wrestled with this growing fear, something far more sinister was brewing beneath the surface. Late one night, as the Veltrians slept in their makeshift camp, a strange tremor shook the ground. It was like the earth itself was groaning under some unimaginable pressure. The tremor passed, but then came something even more unsettling. A low, throbbing hum. The sound reverberated through the trees and the ground, a deep vibration that seemed to reach into the very core of the planet. At first, only a few Veltrians heard it, but as the hours passed, more and more felt the presence of the hum. A low, oppressive energy that seemed to push against their very beings. Tarius gathered his team quickly, their faces drawn and anxious. We have to find the source of this. It's not just a tremor, it's something more. They ventured into the heart of the forest, following the vibrations that grew louder with each step. The further they went, the more unnatural the surroundings seemed. The trees twisted unnervingly, their gnarled roots reaching up from the ground as if trying to pull them down. Strange, phosphorescent plants began to grow, glowing in hues of green and purple that should not have existed. At the center of this twisted, alien grove, the source of the hum became clear. A massive, black stone protruded from the earth, covered in strange symbols that pulsed with an eerie light. It seemed to hum with the same deep vibration that had disturbed the Veltrians, and as they approached it, the air grew thick and heavy, pressing against them as if trying to suffocate them. Tarius approached cautiously, his hands trembling as he reached out toward the stone. The moment his fingers made contact, the hum intensified, and a flash of brilliant light erupted from the surface, blinding him. He fell back, his heart racing. Get away from it, Zira cried, but it was too late. In that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere, and a deafening roar filled the air. It wasn't a sound produced by the stone itself, it came from the very earth beneath their feet. The ground began to tremble violently, and the once still forest erupted into chaotic motion. From the cracks in the earth, twisted and mutated creatures began to crawl out, shapes that defied logic and nature. Some were barely recognizable as animals. Others were more monstrous, made of bone, sinew, and pulsating, writhing masses of what could only be described as corrupted energy. Tarius staggered to his feet, his mind racing. What are these creatures? Zira's voice shook. They're not from Earth. This is the consequence of something ancient, something we awakened when we landed here. The Veltrians opened fire, using their advanced weapons to defend themselves against the oncoming horrors, but their energy blasts barely seemed to slow the creatures down. They were relentless. Each creature seemed to absorb the attack and grow stronger, more aggressive. Tarius realized with a sinking feeling that the creatures weren't attacking just because they were hungry or angry. No, there was something more intelligent, more purposeful behind their actions. It was as if they were driven by a primal force, something ancient and unseen that controlled them. "They're a defense mechanism," Tarius said, his voice low with disbelief. "Earth, it's not just alive. It's aware. And we're the invaders." The Veltrians fought desperately, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. It wasn't until they activated their ship's emergency shields that they managed to escape, retreating back to their settlement, their hearts heavy with fear. As they gathered in the ship's war room, Tarius was haunted by the implications of what they had discovered. Earth wasn't just fighting back against their presence, it was fighting to protect itself from the Veltrians. But who, or what, had left those creatures behind? And what had they awakened? One thing was certain. Their arrival on Earth had unleashed something far darker and more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. In the days that followed their harrowing encounter in the forest, the Veltrians' situation grew increasingly dire. Tarius and his team worked around the clock, analyzing the data from their ship's systems and trying to make sense of the growing catastrophe unfolding on Earth. The creatures they had encountered, mutated, horrific, and seemingly drawn to the very presence of the Veltrians, continued to terrorize the surrounding area. The planet's ecosystem was in a state of unraveling, the balance disturbed by their arrival. No longer was Earth the peaceful world they had hoped for. It was becoming a living nightmare, and the creatures, once thought to be mindless predators, were now believed to be part of something much larger, a vast, coordinated defense system. "The creatures we saw in the forest, they weren't just random mutations," Zira said, her voice tinged with a mix of fear and wonder. "They were organized, almost like they were being controlled, directed. It's as if the planet itself is sending them to stop us." Tarius ran a hand over his face, exhaustion creeping into his features. "But why? We've done nothing but try to survive. We didn't ask for this." Zira shook her head. "I don't think it's personal. I think Earth is reacting to an intrusion, and we're not the first ones to make it." "What do you mean?" Tarius asked, his brow furrowed. "The stone we found," she began. "It's not just an anomaly. It's a marker, a remnant of a much older civilization, one that may have arrived here long before us. Perhaps they too made the mistake of attempting to colonize Earth, only to face the same fate we are." Tarius felt a chill run down his spine. If there had been other civilizations before them, what had become of them? Were they lost to the planet, their own remnants swallowed by the forces of Earth itself? Before he could speak, the ship's communication system crackled to life, an urgent signal flashing on the screen. A voice, distorted and strained, broke through. "Tarius, Tarius, come in." It was a distress call from one of the Veltrians stationed at an observation post near the edge of their settlement. His name was Kaller, a junior scientist who had been monitoring Earth's seismic activity. His voice was frantic, filled with fear. "Tarius, you need to come quickly. It's happening, it's already started. The ground it's breaking apart. There are more of them, much more." The line went dead, the signal cutting off abruptly. Tarius wasted no time. "Zira, gather the others. We're heading out." Within moments, the Veltrians were back on the ground, moving swiftly through the forest toward the observation post. The air was thick with tension, the oppressive weight of the planet's strange energy hanging heavy around them. As they neared the post, the ground trembled beneath their feet once more, a deep, resonating rumble that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. When they arrived, the scene before them was chaos incarnate. The observation post had been destroyed, a massive fissure splitting the ground in two. From the chasm, strange glowing tendrils snaked out, twisting and writhing like living creatures. And emerging from the depths were more of the mutated creatures, their forms more grotesque and larger than anything they had seen before. They were drawn to the cracks in the earth as though they were feeding from the energy rising from below. Kaller was nowhere to be found. "Where is he?" Zira asked, her voice trembling. Tarius scanned the wreckage, his heart sinking. "We need to get to higher ground. This is no longer just about survival. It's about understanding what we've awoken before it consumes us all." They made their way to a nearby ridge, hoping to gain some perspective on the madness unfolding below. From their vantage point, the sight was beyond comprehension. The land was fracturing. The once dominant forest now reduced to a twisted landscape of exposed stone and unnatural growth. Trees and plants seemed to sprout from the cracks in the earth, their roots extending like veins, pulsing with an eerie light. The creatures, some of them now towering over the Veltrians, moved in a synchronized pattern, as if responding to some unseen command. Tarius' eyes widened in horror. The creatures weren't simply reacting to their presence. They were part of something larger, an interconnected force that had been waiting to be unleashed. It was as if the entire planet was in a state of metamorphosis, evolving into something alien to all life that had ever existed on Earth. And then, as if to confirm their worst fears, the ground split open again, wider and deeper this time. From the chasm emerged something that made the Veltrians stop dead in their tracks. An enormous, dark form, its body a shifting mass of shadows and writhing tendrils. It was far more massive than anything they had encountered. It seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, an energy so powerful that the air around it crackled with static. This is no animal," Zira whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is something else, something older." Tarius stared at the creature, his mind racing. He had heard legends from the ancient texts of Veltria, stories of planetary consciousness, of beings that existed beyond the physical realm, able to control and influence the very forces of nature. He had never believed them, not truly. Until now, the creature's eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with a deep, almost malevolent light. And as it turned toward them, a deep, resonating voice echoed in their minds. "You have awakened me." Tarius' heart skipped a beat. It spoke, telepathically, directly into his mind. He understood, with terrifying clarity, that Earth was not merely a planet. It was alive in ways they could never have imagined. And it was not only protecting itself, it was protecting something far older, far more powerful, buried beneath its surface. The Veltrians had unwittingly uncovered the planet's dark secret. And now, they were paying the price. The ground beneath Tarius' feet seemed to quiver as the enormous shadowed creature loomed closer, its presence suffocating. Its voice echoed in their minds, not just as a simple command, but as a warning, an ancient one. The Veltrians stood frozen, paralyzed with a fear they had never known before. For the first time since they arrived on Earth, they realized that they were no longer in control. "You have awakened me." The words reverberated in their skulls, a haunting message that penetrated deep into their consciousness. It wasn't just the creature speaking, it was the planet itself. The very core of Earth had stirred, and it was now reaching out, spreading its influence like a shadow over the land. "What is it?" Zira breathed, her voice thin with terror. Tarius couldn't tear his eyes away from the creature's glowing form. The energy that emanated from it was unlike anything they had encountered on Veltria or anywhere else in the universe. It was ancient and primal, a force that existed before time itself. He reached out instinctively, connecting with the databanks on their ship, accessing records of ancient celestial phenomena, and what he found confirmed his worst fears. This is no natural creature. It's a guardian, part of a planetary defense system, an entity older than anything we know. And it's been waiting for someone to awaken it. The ground trembled once more as the massive form of the creature shifted. Its many tendrils, long and coiling, extended toward the Veltrians with slow, deliberate movements. Its glowing eyes locked onto Tarius, and again, the voice echoed in his mind. "You are intruders." Tarius staggered backward. He felt the weight of the words, the truth sinking into him. Earth was not a simple world. It was a living organism, with its own consciousness, its own intelligence. And it was not welcoming. The Veltrians, in their desperation to survive, had disturbed something that had been lying dormant for millennia, something that was now awakening. Zira, ever the pragmatist, grabbed Tarius' arm, her grip firm and urgent. "We need to leave, now." But it was already too late. The ground around them began to crack open further, and from the fissures came more creatures, more twisted and mutated forms, an endless tide of life rising from the very earth, all converging on the Veltrians. They were surrounded. Tarius stood, still trying to comprehend the sheer scale of what was happening. He turned to Zira. If Earth is alive, if it has this kind of power, then we're not just facing a natural disaster. We're facing a conscious force, something that wants us gone. The air shimmered again with a burst of dark energy. Tarius watched as the massive creature raised its tendrils, weaving them in the air like threads of fate itself. The creatures around them paused, silent, watching. And then, with a thunderous roar that shook the sky, the earth began to warp and shift, the atmosphere itself twisting in unnatural ways. Suddenly, the world around them became alien, an alien world in the middle of their own. The sky turned a sickly purple, and the stars that had once been familiar now burned with a faint red hue. The once dominant forest had transformed into a surreal landscape, the trees now towering over them like twisted pillars, and the soil beneath their feet had turned to something darker, something unnatural. "It's changing," Zira whispered, her voice filled with awe and dread. "Earth is reshaping itself around us." Tarius felt a sharp pang of realization. This was the moment they had feared. The planet was not just fighting back, it was restructuring itself, responding to their presence by remaking the world into something else entirely. A world where they, the Veltrians, were the invaders, the trespassers who had awakened something far more powerful than they had ever anticipated. "We can't stay here," Tarius said, his voice breaking through the chaos of his thoughts. "We have to find a way to stop it." Zira nodded, her eyes filled with the same grim understanding. "But how?" The creature, whatever it is, it's not just some defense mechanism. It's Earth itself. And the more we fight it, the more it will reshape everything around us. Before Tarius could respond, the creature spoke again, its voice now full of disdain and finality. "You are not welcome here. Leave, or perish with your world." The words, though telepathic, were no less impactful. They filled their minds with images of destruction, of life vanishing, of a new order being born from the ashes of the old. Earth was not asking them to leave, it was demanding it. And it was prepared to do whatever it took to ensure they did. Tarius' mind raced. There must be a way to reverse this, something, anything that can stop it. The air around them thickened, and the ground quivered beneath their feet again. The creatures began to move, the mutated beings spreading out across the landscape, pushing forward with an unstoppable, unified force. "We don't have time," Zira said, her voice filled with desperation. "We're running out of options." Tarius gripped her arm tightly. "There is one option left. We have to destroy the core, the source of the energy, the heart of Earth itself." Zira's eyes widened in horror. "You're suggesting we destroy the planet?" Tarius shook his head. "Not destroy it. Just disable the core long enough for us to escape. If we can sever its connection to the creature, to the planet's consciousness, maybe, just maybe, we'll stand a chance." Zira didn't hesitate. "Then let's do it." The Veltrians hurriedly retreated back toward their ship, now their last hope. They had to make it to the ship's core energy chamber, the one place on Earth where they might have the technology to sever the planet's hold on them. But the creatures were closing in fast, and the very land beneath their feet seemed to be against them. With each step, they knew the window of survival was closing. The fate of their people, and perhaps the entire planet, rested on the success of their plan. If they failed, Earth would be lost, and the Veltrians would perish along with it, swallowed by the ancient force they had awakened. The Veltrians moved as quickly as they could through the increasingly hostile landscape. The air had turned thick and oppressive, and every step they took seemed to echo with the unnatural hum of Earth's transformed energy. Tarius and Zira led the charge, followed closely by the rest of the team, their eyes focused on their only hope, the ship. But the path to the ship was anything but safe. The Earth itself seemed to be conspiring against them, the once solid ground now shifting and crumbling beneath their feet, cracks yawning open, sending waves of distortion through the atmosphere. The glowing tendrils from below continued to emerge, creeping up from the fissures, twisting through the air like serpents, reaching for the Veltrians. Everywhere they looked, the landscape was changing, evolving into something that was neither Earth nor anything they had ever encountered. Giant, twisted forms of trees, covered in moss-like growths, bent and swayed, their branches reaching out as though alive, as if sensing their intrusion. The mutated creatures, once wild, chaotic entities, now moved with unsettling precision, as if directed by some unseen intelligence. "This place, it's alive," Zira muttered, her eyes darting around, her mind overwhelmed by the alien landscape. "We can't escape it." Tarius clenched his jaw, refusing to let fear overcome him. "We don't have a choice. The ship's the only place where we can disable the connection to the core. It's our last chance." Their destination was close, but the journey felt endless. The landscape seemed to stretch on and on, as if the planet itself was holding them in place, unwilling to let them go. Tarius felt a strange pressure in his chest, a sense that Earth was watching them, calculating, waiting for them to make a wrong move. Finally, they reached the ship, a hollowed-out relic of their once pristine technology, now battered and weathered by the increasingly hostile environment. But even in its damaged state, it was their last hope. "We need to access the central chamber," Tarius ordered. "Zira, come with me. The rest of you, defend the perimeter. We can't let those creatures reach us." As they entered the ship's control room, a strange hum filled the air, familiar but wrong. The ship's systems had been compromised by the planet's energy, twisted into something else entirely. The controls flickered, and the once reliable screens were now filled with jagged static, the systems responding sluggishly to their commands. "We have to hurry," Zira said, her voice sharp with urgency. "The creatures are closing in. We don't have much time before we're overwhelmed." Tarius nodded, already at the central console, tapping furiously at the damaged controls. "I'm trying to access the core energy system. If we can sever the ship's connection to the planet, we might be able to cut off the feedback loop between Earth and the creature." The ship groaned as though it was resisting their attempts. The walls of the control room seemed to pulse with the planet's energy, vibrating with a low, guttural sound. Tarius's fingers flew over the panels, but it felt like he was fighting a force far greater than the technology of his people. "Come on," Tarius muttered under his breath, sweat beading on his forehead. The pressure was building, and the air felt thicker with each passing moment, as if the very space around them was being compressed. Zira, her face pale, watched the door to the control room, her eyes darting back and forth. "Tarius, we need to move faster. They're almost here. We can't hold them off for much longer." The room flashed with a sudden burst of energy. Tarius was thrown backward, his body slamming into the wall. His vision blurred as the ship's systems flickered violently, the glow of Earth's energy enveloping the room. Zira rushed to his side, pulling him up. "Tarius, you have to finish this." Gritting his teeth, Tarius staggered back to the console, determined not to fail. The planet's power was overwhelming, but he could feel the ship's energy core, a pulse deep inside the ship, beating in sync with Earth itself. If he could sever that connection, the feedback loop would be broken. But the cost of such an action would be high. With a final, desperate movement, Tarius slammed his hand down onto the control panel, forcing the connection to the core. The entire ship shook, a deafening, ear-splitting roar filling the air as the core's energy was released. The walls of the control room cracked and groaned, and the sound of the Earth itself splitting open could be heard in the distance. For a moment, everything was still. And then, the ground trembled with an intensity that made the very air crackle. The ship's lights flickered violently, and the control room door blew open with a burst of energy, sending a shockwave through the room. "We've done it," Tarius said, gasping for breath. "We've cut the connection." But as the dust settled and the trembling ceased, they realized the full extent of their actions. The planet had fought back. The mutated creatures, the Guardians, were now swarming the ship, their numbers growing with every passing moment. The ones that had once been simply a threat to the Veltrians were now multiplying rapidly, the land itself seeming to spawn them from the cracks in the earth. And the massive creature, the one that had spoken to them, rose from the depths, its form casting a shadow over the wreckage of the settlement. "You have made a grave mistake." The voice boomed through the air, a telepathic wave that reverberated in their minds. Tarius' heart sank. "We've only delayed it, haven't we? It's not over." Zira nodded grimly. "No, it's far from over. We've cut off its direct connection to the ship, but Earth is still alive. It's still in control." Tarius felt a cold sense of despair wash over him. They had thought they could control the situation, but in doing so, they had only made things worse. The planet was not just fighting back anymore. It was fighting to reclaim its power, and the Veltrians were now more deeply entwined with it than ever. With the ship's systems now entirely overwhelmed, Tarius looked at Zira and the rest of the team, their faces grim, knowing the truth. The final battle had begun. They had no choice now but to fight for survival against Earth itself. The battlefield before them was no longer just Earth. It had become a living nightmare, a chaotic and brutal reflection of a world that had turned against them. The creatures, once scattered and unorganized, now moved with eerie synchronization, their grotesque forms scuttling across the fractured ground, drawn to the Veltrians as if they were prey. The massive creature, their planet's primal guardian, loomed above them, its dark tendrils twisting in the air like a storm of shadows. Tarius and Zira stood at the front of the ship, watching the storm unfold. The planet's pulse beat in the very air around them, the once familiar ground now hostile and unrecognizable, a place that seemed to actively rebel against their presence. Tarius turned to Zira, his expression resolute. "We have one last chance. The feedback loop we created, it wasn't just the ship. The energy disruption has thrown off the balance of Earth itself. We need to destabilize the planet's core before the creature can fully regain control. But it's going to cost us everything." Zira's face was pale, but there was a fire in her eyes, an understanding that whatever was to come, they would either succeed or perish. "I understand," she said. "But how do we do it? We're surrounded, and the creature is far more powerful than we imagined." Tarius looked toward the horizon, his thoughts racing. The ship's systems had been compromised, but there was one more place they could access, the ancient core, the same place where their ancestors had placed the heart of their technology. Deep within Earth's shifting crust, hidden for eons, was an energy conduit capable of triggering a massive release of power. A controlled explosion that could destabilize the planet's connection to the creature. The risk was monumental, and there was no way to ensure survival. But Tarius knew what had to be done. "We have to make our way to the core, now," he said. "We don't have much time before the creature regains its full strength. If we fail, Earth will reset itself, and we'll be lost." Zira nodded without hesitation. "Let's go." The Veltrians moved quickly through the ship's remaining functional corridors, with Zira, Tarius, and a handful of the most capable soldiers leading the charge. Their weapons were mostly useless now, the creature's regenerative abilities beyond anything they had prepared for. What they needed now was speed and precision. Outside, the mutated creatures were closing in fast, the air charged with an unnatural energy as the ground split further, sending bursts of light and shadow into the sky. The giant creature's presence was overwhelming, a dark and terrible force that seemed to pulse with the heart of the planet itself. As they reached the underground passage to the core, the tremors grew stronger. Earth was fighting them, unwilling to let them near its heart. The walls of the tunnel buckled and cracked as if alive, bending and twisting in impossible ways. Tarius pushed forward, his mind focused only on the task ahead. They finally reached the heart of the tunnel, an ancient chamber, now exposed by the seismic shifts, filled with machinery long abandoned, and the central conduit that connected their technology to the planet itself. "Activate the core," Tarius ordered. "We don't have much time before the planet seals itself off again." Zira moved to a console near the chamber's center, her hands flying across the controls. The ship's power reserves were low, but the ancient core was still capable of immense energy. They had designed it to harness Earth's natural resources, but now they needed it to be their weapon. The console flickered, the lights dimming momentarily before the systems activated, casting a faint blue glow over the room. A low hum filled the chamber as the core powered up, its energy surging. Tarius watched the readouts closely. It's working. We're destabilizing the core. Zira turned to him, her face determined but grim. We've only got one shot at this. Once the core is fully activated, there's no going back. If we're still inside when the chain reaction starts, we won't make it out. Tarius looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of their decision. The plan had always been risky, but it was their only hope. There was no alternative. They had come to Earth looking for refuge, but instead, they had awakened something ancient, something that would not stop until they were gone. We don't have a choice, Tarius said, his voice hard. If we don't stop this, there will be no Earth left, no survivors. The creatures will overrun everything. The planet will reset itself, and nothing we know will remain. The ground shook violently, and the ceiling above them cracked, sending chunks of stone tumbling to the floor. The planet was fighting back, but it was too late. The core had already begun its countdown. Zira looked at him one last time, her eyes filled with an understanding born of shared sacrifice. Goodbye, Tarius. Tarius nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. Goodbye, Zira. They didn't have to say more. There was nothing left to say. The final decision had been made. Outside the chamber, the dark creature let out a sound that was not a roar but a terrible, resonant scream. The very air seemed to tremble as its form rippled, expanding as if drawing on the last reserves of the planet's energy. It was too late for it to stop them now. Tarius turned to the core's central activation point, his hands trembling as he pressed the final sequence. The energy swelled, and the ground beneath them shook violently. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still as the ship's power, the planet's energy, and the ancient core all converged in one final, catastrophic release. A blinding light erupted from the chamber, blurring Tarius' vision. The very earth seemed to groan in agony as the energy surged upward, shattering the surface, obliterating the twisted landscape. The creatures screamed, their forms disintegrating in the wake of the blast. And then, silence. When Tarius awoke, he was lying on the ground, the air around him still and calm. The sky was clear, the stars shining down in the peaceful night. The familiar hum of the ship's systems was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. He pushed himself up slowly, his body aching but alive. The land around him had changed. The once chaotic and alien landscape was now serene, as though the planet had reset itself. There were no creatures, no shadows, just Earth, silent and still. Zira was lying nearby, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She had made it. Tarius helped her to her feet, his voice a hoarse whisper. Did we win? Zira nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the peaceful horizon. I think so. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Tarius let out a deep breath. They had succeeded, at least for now. But as he looked at the stars, he knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter. Earth had been saved, but the Veltrians' journey was far from over. And somewhere, deep in the quiet of space, the echoes of their past mistakes still lingered, waiting for the day when they would again face the consequences of their actions.